The morning sun stretched over the wide sky, slowly painting it with soft shades of orange and pink. The air was fresh, carrying the smell of wet grass and blooming wildflowers. Samuel Carter stood at the edge of his porch, holding a steaming cup of coffee, his eyes resting on the vast land before him. His ranch spread far across the valley, with wooden fences marking the boundaries and tall oak trees standing like guardians around it. For Samuel, mornings were more than just a part of the day. They were a reminder of peace, of life's slow rhythm, and of the bond he shared with his land. Each morning he would rise before the first light, listen to the quiet sounds of nature waking up, and feel a kind of gratitude that words could not explain. The ranch was not just a piece of property. It was his family's history. His grandfather had worked on the same soil, plowing fields with his bare hands. His father had built the barn that still stood proudly, its red paint faded but strong. And now, Samuel carried on the tradition, caring for the animals, mending the fences, and keeping the land alive. As he sipped his coffee, he watched his horses trot across the field. Their manes shone in the early light, and their strong legs kicked up soft clouds of dust as they ran. To Samuel, they were not just animals. They were companions, living souls that shared the land with him. He often spoke to them, not because he expected them to understand, but because talking to them made the world feel less lonely. The roosters crowed, the cows began to moo, and the farm slowly woke up. Samuel placed his cup on the porch railing and walked toward the barn. His boots pressed against the damp earth and the cool wind brushed against his face. He greeted the cows one by one, checking their feed and patting them gently. Then he moved to the chickens, scattering grains with practiced hands. His work was not glamorous, but it gave him peace. Life on the ranch had a rhythm, and Samuel loved it. Work was hard, but it was honest. Every nail hammered into a fence post, every drop of sweat on his brow was a reminder of independence. He lived far from the noise of the city, away from crowded streets and endless traffic. Out here, the only sound was the wind moving through the grass and the laughter of birds in the trees. Yet, despite this peace, Samuel's life was not free of worry. For the past few months, letters had been arriving in his mailbox. They were not friendly letters, nor were they personal. They came from the local homeowners association, a group of people who claimed authority over the area. At first, Samuel ignored them. His ranch had stood for decades before the HOA ever existed. His land was his, not theirs. But the letters grew sharper, their words filled with warnings. They spoke of rules, fines, and demands. They wanted him to paint his barn a different color. They complained about the untidy look of his fences. They even sent notes about the dust rising from his fields when he rode his horses. Samuel read each letter carefully, then folded it and placed it in a drawer inside his wooden desk. He never replied. To him, the letters were nothing more than paper. Paper could not understand the heart of the land. Paper could not smell the rain on the soil or hear the cry of an eagle above the hills. Still, the letters kept coming. One morning, as he was repairing a section of the fence, Samuel saw a car pull up near his gate. It was a shiny black car, far too polished for the dirt road. Out stepped a man in a suit carrying a clipboard. He walked with quick, sharp steps as if the ground itself annoyed him. "Good morning," the man called out, adjusting his glasses. Samuel wiped the sweat from his brow and leaned on the wooden post. "Morning," he replied, his voice calm and steady. "I'm here from the HOA," the man said firmly. "We've sent you several notices about your property. You haven't responded." Samuel looked at him for a moment, then at the clipboard. "I've read them," he said simply. "Then you know you're in violation," the man replied. "Your barn doesn't meet the community's visual standards. The fencing is irregular and the general upkeep is, well, not aligned with the guidelines." Samuel's lips pressed into a thin line. He turned back to his fence and hammered another nail. The sound of metal against wood echoed between them. "This land has been here longer than your guidelines," Samuel said finally, his voice quiet but firm. The man frowned. "Be that as it may, rules are rules. If you don't comply, fines will increase, and further action will be taken." Samuel looked up, his eyes steady as the morning sky. "This ranch feeds my animals and keeps me alive. It doesn't need to meet your idea of beauty." The man shifted uncomfortably, then straightened his tie. "I'll make a note of your refusal," he said sharply, turning back to his car. Samuel watched the car drive away, its tires stirring up dust on the dirt road. For a long time he stood there staring at the empty road, thinking. He wasn't a man who liked conflict. He preferred peace, quiet work, and the simple joy of living close to nature. But something inside him told him that the letters and visits wouldn't stop. That night Samuel sat on his porch under the stars. The sky stretched endlessly above him, filled with bright dots of light. The air was cool and the crickets sang their night song. He leaned back in his chair, holding his old guitar. His fingers strummed gently, filling the silence with soft music. He thought about his father, who had once told him, "A man who stands for nothing will fall for anything." The words echoed in his heart. Samuel knew he could not allow strangers to control his life, not here, not on the land his family had built with their bare hands. The next morning, Samuel woke earlier than usual. He worked harder, repairing every fence, oiling every gate hinge, and sweeping every corner of the barn. It wasn't because he wanted to please the HOA. It was because he wanted to remind himself of the value of his land, of the beauty that others refused to see. As the days passed, he continued his routine, but the letters kept arriving. Each one carried stronger warnings, darker tones. Some even mentioned sending representatives to ensure compliance. Samuel read those words and felt a storm brewing in his chest. He didn't want trouble, but if trouble came to his land, he would face it, not with anger, but with the quiet strength of a man who understood what it meant to belong to the soil. And deep down, Samuel knew something was coming. The peace of the ranch was about to be tested. The week after the man with the clipboard left, Samuel Carter noticed the change in tone inside the letters he received. They were no longer just stiff demands written in polite words. Now they were sharp, almost unfriendly, as if someone was angry that he hadn't bowed to their rules. One envelope carried bold red letters across the top. Final warning. Samuel opened it at his kitchen table, the smell of his morning coffee rising beside him. The words inside were strict and cold. Failure to comply will result in penalties, property inspections, and direct visits by HOA representatives. He read it slowly, line by line, then folded the paper and placed it in the drawer where the others lay. He didn't slam it shut or tear the paper. He simply placed it there, calm as ever. To him, those words were like barking dogs, loud but powerless if you did not give them fear. Still, Samuel understood what it meant. They would come. They would not stop at letters. That evening he walked across his land, the sun sinking low behind the hills. The sky turned orange and purple, the cattle grazing quietly in the fading light. Samuel ran his hand across the rough wood of the fence, feeling its strength. "This land is mine," he whispered, "and no man in a suit or in boots will take that truth away." Days turned into weeks, and the silence broke one afternoon when Samuel heard the sound of an engine rumbling down the dirt road. He looked up from where he was repairing a wagon wheel and saw a dark truck rolling toward his gate. Dust trailed behind it, and inside were 3 men. They didn't look like farmers. Their clothes were too clean, their boots too polished. They carried themselves with the heavy confidence of men sent to deliver a message. The truck stopped, and the men stepped out. One was tall and broad-shouldered, his face hidden under a wide hat. Another had sharp eyes, always scanning the land as if measuring it. The third carried a folder tucked under his arm, the kind that smelled of office papers and rules. Samuel stood by the wagon, calm as ever, his hand still resting on the wooden wheel. "Afternoon," he said, his voice steady. The tall man spoke first. "Mr. Carter, we're here on behalf of the Homeowners Association." "You've ignored their notices." Samuel nodded once. "I've read them." "Then you know why we're here," the sharp-eyed man added. "You've left us no choice. We're here to inspect your property, document the violations, and give you one last chance to comply before fines escalate." Samuel's eyes were calm, but inside his chest, his heart beat slower, stronger. He was not afraid, but he was watchful. He stepped forward, boots pressing into the dirt, and leaned lightly against the fence. "This is private land," he said softly. "It does not belong to your association." The man with the folder cleared his throat and pulled out a paper. According to the agreement signed when this area was brought under HOA guidelines, every property within the boundary must comply. "That includes yours," Samuel shook his head. "My ranch has been here long before your guidelines." "The soil doesn't answer to paper." The men exchanged glances. The tall one stepped closer. Look, we're not here to argue. We're here to tell you, if you don't follow the rules, you'll regret it. This is your last warning." The words hung in the air. They were not shouted, but they carried weight. It was the kind of sentence meant to scare a man into surrender. Samuel looked at the man's eyes. He didn't blink. He didn't move back. He simply stood tall, his presence as strong as the oak trees that bordered his land. "This ranch feeds animals, not paper rules," he replied. "If you came here to scare me, you'll leave disappointed." For a moment, silence filled the air. The wind rustled through the grass and a hawk cried above. The men shifted, unsure whether to push harder or retreat. Finally, the one with the folder closed it with a sharp snap. "You'll hear from us again," he said. The men climbed back into their truck and drove away, leaving dust swirling behind them. Samuel stood where he was until the sound of the engine disappeared. He bent down, picked up his tools, and returned to his wagon wheel. His face was calm, but inside he knew the storm was growing. That night, Samuel couldn't sleep easily. He lay on his bed staring at the wooden ceiling, listening to the sounds of the night. The crickets chirped, the owls hooted, and the wind pressed gently against the walls of his house. He thought of his father again, of the lessons he had taught him. His father was not a loud man, but he had been firm. "Land is not just dirt," he once said. "It is spirit. It remembers the hands that care for it, and it gives back what you put into it." Samuel closed his eyes, breathing deeply. The HOA could not understand this truth. They saw numbers, fines, and guidelines. They saw control. But Samuel saw life. By dawn, he rose with new determination. He walked the ranch, checking every gate, every fence post, every tool in his shed. He began to prepare not for war, not for violence, but for the inevitable confrontation. He knew the men would return, and when they did, he would not meet them with fear. He would meet them with strength. The next week, the letters changed again. They no longer carried warnings. Now they carried dates. One letter read, "On this day, HOA representatives will arrive to enforce compliance." Samuel folded it and set it in the drawer with the others. His hand lingered on the wood of the drawer for a moment, then he closed it gently. The air felt heavier in the days leading up to that date. Even the animals sensed it. The horses were restless, their ears flicking at every sound. The cows huddled closer together and the dogs barked more often at the road. Samuel moved with calmness, but inside, his mind was planning. He knew the men would come not just with words this time. They would come to push him, to break his spirit. He needed to be ready, not with fists, but with wisdom. On the morning of the date written in the letter, the sky was gray, heavy with clouds. Samuel stood on his porch, his hat pulled low, his eyes watching the road. He had been up before dawn, working quietly, preparing the ranch in his own way. Then, just as the sun began to rise, he heard it, the sound of engines. 2 trucks this time, larger than before, rolled down the dirt road. Dust lifted into the air and the noise echoed across the fields. Samuel's dogs barked loudly, running along the fence. The cattle lifted their heads uneasy. The horses shuffled in their pen, snorting nervously. The truck stopped at his gate. 6 men stepped out. They looked different from the last group. These were not men with clipboards and folders. These were men with heavy boots, strong shoulders, and cold eyes. They carried no weapons in their hands, but their presence alone felt like a challenge. Samuel stepped off his porch and walked toward them, slow and steady, each step pressing firmly into the earth. He stopped at the gate, resting his hand on the wooden post, his posture tall and calm. "Morning," he said quietly. The tallest of the group smirked. "Mr. Carter, today you'll learn what happens when a man refuses to listen." Samuel's eyes did not waver. He looked at them the way a mountain looks at the storm, solid, unmoving, patient. "This land doesn't bow," he replied. The men chuckled darkly, spreading out, their boots crunching against the dirt. They thought they would frighten him. They thought they would break the silence of the ranch with their force. But Samuel had lived with storms before. He knew how to stand firm when the sky broke open. He knew how to bend like the trees without snapping. As the men moved closer, the air around the ranch seemed to hold its breath. The cattle stirred nervously. The dogs barked louder. The horses stamped their hooves, and Samuel, standing at the gate of his family's land, felt no fear. He was ready, for today the lesson would begin. The men at the gate stood with heavy boots pressed against the dirt, their shoulders squared, their eyes cold. They had been sent to show force to make Samuel Carter bend. But Samuel stood tall, his hand resting lightly on the wooden fence post as if it were a part of him. His face showed no fear, only calm determination. Behind him, the ranch was alive with quiet strength. The horses stamped their hooves, snorting as if sensing their master's tension. The cattle shifted uneasily, forming a tight group in the pasture. Samuel's dogs barked from the porch, their deep voices warning the strangers that they were not welcome. The tallest man of the group stepped forward. His voice carried a mocking edge. "Mr. Carter," he said, "this is the last chance. You've ignored the letters, ignored the visits, and now we're here to make sure you follow the rules. One way or another." Samuel's eyes narrowed slightly, but his voice remained steady. "This land is mine," he replied. "It does not belong to your rules, and no group of men can change that." The men exchanged glances. They expected him to tremble, to stutter, to give in. Instead, he spoke with the quiet power of someone who had weathered storms much fiercer than them. The second man, with sharp eyes and quick steps, circled a little closer to the fence. He glanced at the barn, the fields, the animals. He shook his head as if disappointed. "This place doesn't meet the standards," he said coldly. "Your barn looks old. Your fences aren't uniform. Your animals stir up too much dust. You're ruining the image of this community." Samuel turned his head toward the man, his voice calm but firm. "This is not an image," he said. "This is life. My barn has stood through storms and summers. My fences hold strong because I built them with my hands. The dust rises because my horses run free. That is not ruin, it is truth." The words carried weight, but the men laughed. They were not here to understand. They were here to pressure, to intimidate, to make him kneel. The tallest man slammed his boot against the wooden gate. The sound echoed sharply across the land. "You're outnumbered, old man," he sneered. "Do yourself a favor. Sign the papers. Pay the fines. Fix the barn, or we'll make sure you regret it." Samuel looked down at the boot on his gate. He slowly lifted his gaze back to the man's eyes. His face showed no anger, only a calm strength that unsettled them. "This gate has kept out storms stronger than you," he said softly. For a moment, silence hung in the air. The men shifted uncomfortably, though they tried not to show it. They were used to fear. They were used to men stepping back. But Samuel was not stepping back. He was standing like a mountain. Then Samuel turned slightly and whistled. The sharp sound carried across the field. Instantly, his dogs rushed forward from the porch, barking fiercely. They stopped just inside the fence, their bodies tense, their teeth hidden, but their growls deep. The men stepped back instinctively, surprised by the sudden movement. Samuel's lips curved into the smallest of smiles. "You see," he said calmly, "this land protects itself. Every animal here knows who belongs and who doesn't." The men muttered among themselves, their confidence shaking. But the tall man straightened again, refusing to admit weakness. "Dogs or no dogs, we're not leaving until you listen," he said. Samuel tilted his head. "I am listening," he said. "But I hear nothing worth obeying." The men decided to push further. Two of them walked toward the barn as if to inspect it themselves. But Samuel stepped forward, his boots pressing firmly into the earth. He didn't raise his voice, but his words carried sharpness. "You step on my land without my say," he said. "You disrespect every hand that built it." The men froze. There was something in his tone, something steady and unshakable that made even their boldness pause. The tall man waved his hand. "Go on," he told his men. "Don't let him scare you." But as they moved again, Samuel gave another whistle. This time his horses reacted. The powerful animals charged across the field, their hooves thundering like drums. They stopped near the fence, kicking up clouds of dust. Their strong bodies, their wild energy, and the fierce sound of their movement filled the air. The men staggered back, shielding their faces from the dust. Their polished boots were no match for the raw force of the land itself. Samuel stood firm, his eyes watching them calmly. "This ranch doesn't need fists to fight," he said. "The land speaks for itself." The men coughed and waved away the dust, their faces twisted with frustration. They had come to frighten Samuel, but it was they who felt unsettled. Minutes passed. The men tried again and again to push their words onto him, but every reply Samuel gave was steady, rooted, and impossible to break. He spoke of history, of family, of the bond between man and soil. He reminded them that rules written in offices could never erase the sweat of generations. Finally, the tallest man grew impatient. He slapped the papers against the gate, his voice rising. "Sign it," he demanded. "Sign it or we'll come back and you won't like how it ends." Samuel looked at the papers. He didn't touch them. He didn't even glance long. Then he looked back into the man's eyes. "Leave them," he said quietly. "But know this, no matter how many times you return, this land will not bow." The man's hand trembled, though he tried to hide it. He dropped the papers onto the dirt and turned sharply toward the truck. "Let's go," he snapped to the others. The men muttered angrily, but obeyed. They climbed into their trucks, engines roaring, tires spinning as they turned on the dirt road. Dust rose high, but Samuel didn't move. He stood at the gate, his dogs at his side, watching until the trucks were nothing more than faint dots in the distance. When the silence returned, Samuel bent down, picked up the papers, and calmly walked to the barn. He placed them on a shelf where the dust would cover them in time. Then he stepped outside again, taking a deep breath. The wind was cool, carrying the scent of grass and earth. The horses grazed quietly now, their wild run finished. The cattle returned to their calm chewing. The dogs lay at his feet, still alert but proud. Samuel looked across the land, his land, and felt the strength return to his chest. The men had tried to break him, but they had left unsettled, shaken. Even humiliated, they had come with force, but left with dust in their eyes and the sound of thundering hooves echoing in their ears. That night, Samuel sat on his porch again. The stars were bright, filling the sky like lanterns. He leaned back in his chair, guitar resting on his knee, his fingers strumming a slow tune. He thought of the day, of the men who had come and gone. They would return, he knew that. But tonight he felt no fear. He felt only pride. "This land," he whispered to himself, "will always teach those who come with greed. It doesn't bend. It doesn't break. It simply stands." And Samuel, the quiet rancher with steady eyes, knew that the battle was far from over. But he also knew that the ranch had already begun to teach its painful lesson. The dust from the last visit had barely settled when another letter arrived in Samuel Carter's mailbox. This one was longer than the others, written in bold print, stamped with official-looking seals. It carried words that spoke of legal measures, forced compliance, and even removal of property rights. Samuel read it once, then folded it and placed it in the drawer with the rest. The pile of letters had grown thick by now, but he still treated them the same way, quietly, without anger, without fear. Yet Samuel understood something clearly. The men would return. Not with a simple threat this time, but with a plan to crush him. He stood on his porch looking out across the wide fields. The sun dipped low, bathing the land in gold. His horses grazed quietly. His cattle rested in the pasture, and the wind whispered through the trees. Everything looked peaceful, but Samuel knew a storm was gathering. He decided to prepare not with fists or weapons, but with the wisdom of a man who knew his land better than anyone. For the next few days, Samuel worked tirelessly. He mended every fence with stronger posts, making them solid and firm. He reinforced the barn doors, checked every lock, and placed ropes and tools where he might need them quickly. He trained his dogs to respond to whistles and signals, teaching them to guard the property without crossing into aggression. He also spent time with his horses, running them through the fields, guiding them to move together as a herd when he gave a command. He knew their strength, their thunderous hooves, could shake the confidence of any outsider. At night, he sat under the stars, planning quietly. He wasn't preparing for a fight, he was preparing to teach a lesson about respect, about roots, about the power of standing firm. The day came sooner than expected. It was early morning when Samuel heard the low growl of multiple engines approaching. He looked up from his field and saw not 2 trucks this time, but 3. They rolled down the dirt road like shadows, stirring up thick clouds of dust. When they stopped at the gate, nearly a dozen men stepped out. Some wore jackets with the HOA emblem, while others looked like hired muscle, big men with heavy steps and unfriendly stares. The leader from before was there too, his hat pulled low, his face set with determination. Samuel walked slowly toward the gate, his posture straight, his steps steady. He stopped just inside the fence, leaning lightly against the wooden post. His dogs appeared at his side, growling low but controlled, waiting for his signal. The leader spoke first, his voice sharp. "Carter, this is the end of the road. You've ignored every notice, every warning, and every visit. We're done asking. Either you comply today or we take action." Samuel's eyes met his. "Action against truth is always wasted," he replied calmly. The man frowned. "Enough riddles. We're here to make sure you follow the rules whether you like it or not." "Move aside." Samuel didn't move. His hand rested on the fence, his body rooted like an oak tree. "This land is not yours to take," he said. The men stepped forward, clearly intending to push their way in. But Samuel was ready. He gave a sharp whistle. Instantly, his dogs barked loudly, circling the gate. Their bodies moved in perfect rhythm, not attacking but blocking every step forward. Their growls rumbled through the air, warning the strangers that this land was not open to them. The men hesitated. A few stepped back, unsettled by the fierce sound of the dogs. The leader waved his hand. "Ignore them! Keep moving!" But before they could take another step, Samuel gave another whistle. This one was lower, longer. The ground itself seemed to answer. From across the field, his horses began to run. Their powerful bodies thundered as they charged together, a wave of strength and speed. They didn't crash into the men, they didn't need to. They circled the pasture near the gate, their hooves pounding like drums, dust rising in great clouds. The men staggered back, shielding their faces, coughing in the storm of dirt. The sound of the herd was deafening, wild, unstoppable. It was as if the land itself had risen to defend Samuel. The leader shouted, but his voice was drowned out by the thunder of hooves. His polished boots slipped in the dust, and he stumbled. Barely keeping his balance, Samuel stood firm, his eyes watching them calmly. "You bring force," he said, his voice carrying over the noise. "But force is weak against roots. This land knows me. It does not know you. That is why it resists you." The men struggled, their faces covered in dust, their neat clothes stained. Their confidence cracked. The show of power they had come with was nothing against the natural strength of the ranch. The dogs barked louder, the horses ran harder, and the dust thickened until the men could hardly see. Finally, the leader waved his arms, shouting at his men to retreat. They stumbled back toward the trucks, coughing and blinking. Some tripped over rocks. Others clutched their jackets tight against the wind and dirt. One by one, they climbed into their vehicles, slamming the doors shut. Engines roared, tires spun, and the trucks pulled away, leaving a cloud of failure behind them. Samuel gave a final whistle, and the dogs calmed. The horses slowed, their thunder fading into quiet steps. The dust began to settle, and peace slowly returned to the land. Samuel stood at the gate, watching the trucks disappear down the road. His face was calm, but his chest carried the steady rhythm of victory. He hadn't raised a fist. He hadn't shouted. He had simply stood firm, and the ranch itself had spoken for him. That evening, Samuel sat on his porch again. The stars glimmered above, brighter than usual, as if the sky itself approved of his stand. He strummed his guitar softly, the notes rising into the night air. He thought about the men, about how they had come with confidence and left in silence. He thought about his father's words, about the spirit of the land. "This land teaches," he whispered, and today it taught them. The lesson had been painful, but not through violence. It had been painful because it showed them something they could never control. The bond between a man and his home, between roots and soil, between life and land. Samuel leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. The night was quiet, filled only with the sound of crickets and the gentle breeze. He knew they might return again, perhaps with new plans, new ideas, new papers. But he also knew something deeper. They had already learned. The fear in their eyes, the dust on their suits, the stumbling of their steps, it was proof that the ranch had spoken louder than any words could. And Samuel Carter, the quiet rancher, knew that no matter what came next, the land would always stand with him. The morning after the last visit was calm, almost serene. The sun rose slowly over the ranch, casting warm light on the fences, the barn, and the wide open fields. Samuel Carter stood on his porch, drinking coffee as he always did, but this morning the air felt different. It was lighter, freer, as if the land itself had taken a deep breath and settled into peace. The past few days had been tense. The letters, the threats, the men arriving with heavy steps and cold eyes, all of it had tested Samuel in ways he had never imagined. Yet standing there now, looking across the fields, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The ranch had spoken for him, and those who had come to challenge him had finally understood the strength of his land and the determination of a man who belonged to it. Samuel's dogs ran ahead, chasing the morning breeze while his horses grazed quietly near the fence. The cattle stirred gently, moving toward the barn for breakfast. Life on the ranch had returned to its normal rhythm, and yet there was a new sense of respect in the air. Even the land seemed to shine a little brighter, as though it were proud of the man who had defended it without anger, without harm, simply by standing firm and knowing his place in the world. Samuel walked through the fields, checking on the animals, touching the wooden posts, feeling the soil between his fingers. Every corner of his ranch seemed to hum with gratitude. This was more than land. It was a living testament to his family's work, to generations of care, and now, to the quiet victory of courage and patience. By mid-morning, a familiar sound broke the silence. A single car approached the gate, not a truck filled with men, but a small sedan carrying a figure Samuel recognized. It was the HOA leader from before, the man who had sent the thugs and tried to force compliance. But this time his demeanor was different. His shoulders were relaxed, his steps slower, his voice calmer. "Mr. Carter," he called politely, raising a hand in greeting. Samuel stepped forward, his usual calm expression in place. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady. The man hesitated for a moment, as if unsure how to begin. Then he said, I wanted to speak with you. After everything that happened, it's clear we underestimated you. Your land, your animals, your resolve. It's impressive." Samuel nodded slowly. "Thank you. But I didn't fight to impress. I simply protected what belongs to me and my family." The man glanced around the ranch, his eyes taking in the strong fences, the thriving animals, and the well-tended fields. "It's more than protection. It's respect. Something we clearly lacked." Samuel looked at him steadily. "Respect is earned, not demanded. You came here thinking rules could replace understanding. You've learned that a hard lesson doesn't always come from force. Sometimes it comes from patience, preparation, and standing firm." The man nodded, his expression thoughtful. He handed Samuel a folded envelope. "Consider this an official statement. The HOA will no longer interfere with your property. Your compliance is no longer required. Your land is yours. You've earned this respect." Samuel accepted the envelope without breaking his calm demeanor. He placed it in his pocket, feeling the weight of words that confirmed what the land had already proven. "Thank you," he said simply. "I hope you share this understanding with others. Land is not just dirt, it is life, history, and responsibility." The man smiled faintly, a gesture of humility he hadn't shown before. "I will, and I will remember this lesson." With that, he turned and drove away, leaving Samuel and his ranch in complete silence once more. But this silence was not empty. It was full of triumph, of peace restored, and of life continuing without fear or interference. Samuel walked slowly back toward the barn, his boots pressing firmly into the soft earth. The animals followed him in their usual patterns, sensing the calm. He checked on each of them, speaking quietly, giving them the attention they deserved. Each horse received a pat on the neck, each cow a gentle touch, each dog a warm word. As he worked, Samuel reflected on what had happened. He realized that the real victory was not in scaring away the men or forcing them to leave. It was in showing them that respect and strength were not the same as fear. He had not needed to raise his voice or his hands. He had used the land, the animals, and his quiet confidence to show the truth, that some things are too strong, too rooted to be moved by threats or paper. He thought of his father and grandfather, who had always spoken about the importance of standing firm. Their lessons had been passed down quietly without ceremony, but they had shaped him into the man he was. And today, the legacy of those lessons had proven stronger than any rules or threats sent by outsiders. As evening approached, the ranch was bathed in golden light once again. Samuel stood on his porch looking at the horizon. The air was filled with the gentle sounds of nature, the low hum of bees, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of birds settling in for the night. He felt a deep sense of contentment. It wasn't just peace that settled in his heart, it was pride. Not pride in defeating others, but pride in standing true to himself, to his family, and to the land that had always been his home. The animals moved around him, quiet and safe. The fences held strong. The barn glowed warmly in the sunset. The letters that had once threatened his life now lay forgotten, powerless against the calm wisdom that had guided him through every challenge. Samuel lifted his gaze to the sky. The first stars began to twinkle. He strummed his guitar gently, letting the notes float over the ranch like a soft breeze. Music had always been part of his life, a way to mark the days, to honor the land, and to celebrate quiet victories. He played for the animals, for the wind, for the trees. He played for the men who had come with threats, hoping they would understand what he could not say in words alone. Strength is not in force. Strength is in calm, steady resolve. Respect is earned, not demanded. Days turned into weeks, and life on the ranch returned to its steady rhythm. The HOA never sent another letter. No men came with threats or warnings. Samuel could work freely, caring for his animals, tending his fields, and enjoying the peace he had fought so quietly to protect. Neighbors who had once whispered about the conflicts began to notice the calm dignity in Samuel's demeanor. Some approached him quietly, asking how he had faced the challenges, how he had stood firm without losing his temper. Samuel simply smiled, offering words of wisdom. "The land will guide you," he would say. "If you listen, it will teach you more than any letter or rule ever could." And the land continued to teach him too, every sunrise, every gentle rain, every strong wind. It was alive, strong, and eternal, just as he had always known. Months later, Samuel walked the ranch at dawn as he always did. The morning mist clung to the grass and the dew sparkled like tiny jewels. He paused near the fence, running his hands along the weathered wood. The memory of the men who had tried to challenge him faded like a distant shadow. Now the ranch was stronger, more alive than ever. The horses ran freely, the cattle grazed calmly, the dogs played under the trees. Every corner of the property spoke of care, respect, and love. Samuel smiled softly. He had learned something too, not just about protecting land, but about the power of patience, courage, and wisdom. He had faced those who tried to control him and had emerged not only victorious but also respected, both by others and by himself. The ranch was more than a home. It was a statement, a living proof that truth, patience, and courage could overcome fear and intimidation. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, Samuel Carter breathed deeply, feeling the warm light on his face, the earth beneath his feet, and the quiet strength of a life lived true. The HOA's threats were gone. The thugs had crawled away in humiliation long ago. And Samuel, the quiet rancher, had taught a lesson that no paper, no rule, and no man could ever erase. That the heart of the land and the soul of a man are stronger than any force that tries to break them.